ॐ वेदर्षयः समारभ्य वेदान्ताचार्या मध्यमाः योगीरां सुरत्कुमारपर्यन्तं वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् रत्नाकराधौतपदां हिमालयकिरीटिनीं ब्रह्मराजर्षिरत्नाढ्यां वन्दे भारतमातरम्. Salutations and adorations to all the great preceptors of the holy land of Bharatavarsha, right from the Vedic Rishis to the great Vedanta Acharyas, to my Diksha Guru, Yogi Ram Suratkumar Maharaj of Tiruvannamala. Salutations and adorations to our holy motherland Bharatavarsha, whose crown is the mighty Himalayas, whose sacred feet are washed by three great oceans, and who is adorned with the jewels of Brahma Rishis and Raja Rishis. Among the Shad Darshanas, we have already glanced through Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya and Yoga. The fifth one is Purva Mimamsa. Purva means earlier. The sixth one is called Uttara Mimamsa, the later Mimamsa. Mimamsa means analysis of the words, sentences, the contents of our ancient Vedas. Purva Mimamsa is mainly concerned about the rites and rituals that the Vedas have prescribed in the Karma Kanda. Whereas Uttara Mimamsa, also known as Vedanta, is concerned about the philosophical doctrines of the Upanishads. Jaimini is supposed to be the author, compiler of the Purva Mimamsa Sutras. The Purva Mimamsa insists that the rites and rituals that are prescribed in the Vedas, if they are understood properly and they are followed rightly and systematically, that itself will lead to the ultimate self-realization or God-realization. That is the philosophy of Purva Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa in the earlier days, they didn't posit a God. They didn't find any necessity for a God because the Purva Mimamsakas firmly believed that performance of the rites and rituals, the Vedic homas and havens prescribed in the Karma Kanda, if you perform that, that itself will bring the fruit, moksha, or the place in heaven. That is assured, the fruits in heaven are assured to one who performs the Vedic rites and rituals. And therefore, Purva Mimamsa gave, or it posited the Veda itself as a supreme God. No other greater God than the Vedas. Whatever Veda is eternal and whatever is prescribed in the Veda, that is to be followed. And the rites and rituals are to be followed. The gods and goddesses worshipped in the rites and rituals, they are subordinate to the Vedas, according to Purva Mimamsakas of the earlier part. So, stress was mainly on the performance of the yagas and yajnas. Purva Mimamsaka stressed the potency of the mantras. The mantras that you chant, they called it Nada Brahma. By just chanting the mantra, the potency or the word power or the mantras, that itself will bring the fruits for all your actions, karma kanda, everything. So, that is the interpretation of Purva Mimamsaka, and Jaimini's Purva Mimamsa Sutras, they comprise of the text of the Purva Mimamsaka school of Jaimini, who is supposed to be a disciple of Veda Vyasa. Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa consists of a critical study of the rites and ritual portion or the Brahmanas of the Veda. And Jaimini also propounded the theory that the very performance of the rites and rituals, it creates a power which is called apurva, very rare apurva. That apurva conferred heavenly bliss on the practitioner, not a god. Usually, when we do actions, rites and rituals, we think that the god will be pleased and the god will be conferring the benefits. But here in Jaimini Sutras, it is not the god who bestows the fruits of the actions, the karma, the Vedic rites and rituals, and the chanting of the mantras. It is the power which is called apurva that confers the fruits of our rites and rituals. Of course, in the later days, some new schools of Mimamsakas came forward. They were not satisfied with this theory of apurva, and they were not happy with the dismissal of God. They felt that God is necessary. The apurva is bestowed by God only. Where from the apurva will come? Some ultimate reality which must confer that fruit of the action, and that ultimate reality they had to posit a Brahman or a God. Jaimini was more realistic in his approach to the rites and rituals, but in later days, the various other schools of Mimamsa, Prabhagara and Kumarila Bhatta, they took a position deviating from the fundamental precepts of, from the fundamental posits of Jaimini, and they accepted the existence of Brahman, which is behind all the rites and rituals. It is the Brahman that confers the apurva. Veda itself is the authority according to Jaimini. The very first aphorism of the Sutras, Jaimini Sutras, Adhado Dharma Jignasa. In the Vedanta we find the opening line in Brahma Sutras, It is Atato Brahma Jignasa. We will see it later when we take up the Uttara Mimamsa. But here, Jaimini said Atato Brahma Jignasa. Atato Dharma Jignasa. Dharma. Dharanat Dharma Mityaptu. That we accept, we adopt, that is Dharma, the rites and rituals. And we have to go deep into the rites and rituals. That's what Jaimini insisted. So Veda Dharma is supreme, even supreme than all other worship and rites and rituals, etc. Veda Dharma is the most important. He insisted on that. And he said the key to happiness here and in the afterlife, because Jaimini accepted the self which is different from the body-mind-intellect complex. The body-mind-intellect complex, it may vanish with death, but the self exists forever. And for the happiness of that self, the Vedic Dharma, it is to be followed without fail. That he insisted. So that is the key to happiness. It is, he said that in later days there came Smritis. Shruti is the Vedic mantra, the Vedic statements of the great rishis from their intuitive experience. And Smriti is the interpretations of later Tapasvi scholars. So the Smriti Prasthana is more about daily routine, rites and rituals, etc. But Jaimini insisted that the Smriti must inevitably follow the Shruti, and there should not be anything in the Smriti, for example, like Manusmriti, Parashara Smriti, and all these Smritis. They are valid only if they implicitly follow the injunctions of the Vedas. They do not deviate from the Veda. If there is any deviation, that is not to be accepted according to Jaimini. All the works ought to be performed as an offering or ablution to God or the Supreme Being, maintained by the later Mimamsakas, Kumarila Bhatta and others. They Prabhakara Mishra and Kumarila Bhatta, the later Mimamsakas, they accepted God and they said that these rites and rituals, it will please the gods who will confer the fruits. And therefore the theory of Apurva presented by Jaimini was not totally absolute or powerful. The Apurva was conferred by God according to later Mimamsakas, who introduced the God. The Mimamsa speaks about the characteristics of the self. The self is distinct from body, mind and intellect equipment, as I already told you. These instruments vanish along with the body. Self is beyond the senses, body, etc. A real self survives the annihilation of the body. The self, it leaves, departs from the body and it takes to various other bodies. When I am in a particular body, I acquire the vasanas the residuary impressions of all actions, good or bad, they are known as the vasanas. And when I depart from this world, I carry with me, the self carries with itself the vasanas that are acquired when it was in the physical body, in the world of objects. And these vasanas are to be exhausted, and we have to see that no new vasanas are acquired, then only we will get liberation. So the body takes rebirth. The theory of rebirth is there. It takes rebirth, and in the next birth, again we pass through all these actions, worldly actions, good and bad. If more good actions are performed, sacred actions are performed, gradually the vasanas get exhausted and the self is released. The later school of Mimamsa by Prabhakara and Kumarila could not avoid the problem of final salvation as it engaged the attention of later thinkers and other schools of philosophy. According to Jaimini, if you perform the rites and rituals, the Apurva comes and you find happiness in the heaven, eternal happiness in the heaven. But Prabhakara and Kumarila were more concerned about the salvation of the soul, the self, the identification of the self with an ultimate reality. That was the subject that drew their attention more, and therefore they deviated from the theories of Jaimini. So they said that abandoning the prohibited acts, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya, Janita acts, which are supported by all these desire, anger, etc., all these motivated acts, we have to avoid all these acts, prohibited acts, and perform sacred acts, charities, dharma, etc. That is the way for salvation, according to Kumarila and Prabhakara Mishra, and that leads to moksha, performance of selfless actions, divine actions, that leads to moksha. Kumarila's views were more closer to the later Advaita Vedanta. He accepted the view that the Vedas were composed by God, and is Brahman in the form, Nata Brahma. He said Veda itself is God. He called it Nata Brahma. So, for Kumarila, moksha is a positive state, and it is the realization of the self. So, in Jaimini's philosophy, the performance of the actions, they lead us from the release, performance of rites and rituals, they lead us from the bondage, and the non-performance of the nishiddha karmas, that is prohibited acts, not performing the prohibited acts, and performance of the acts prescribed by dharma, sadakara or right conduct, that ultimately leads to the realization of self, or what is called as moksha. Jaimini, as I told, is supposed to be a disciple of Vedavyasa, who wrote the Mahabharata. His sutras were commented by Shavaraswami, made it Jaimini Sutras intelligible to the ordinary people, and later Prabhakara and Kumarila Bhatta also took up the interpretation of the Purva Vedanta Sutras. There is a story in Taittiriya Brahmana regarding the importance of the proper study of the Vedas. Not just the performance of the rites and rituals, blind and superstitious or mechanical performance of rites and rituals that will not bring any fruit. One must have thorough knowledge of the Vedas and perform all these according to the injunctions. So, a Vedic story is attributed. It speaks about the famous sage Bharadwaja. By dint of penance, he attained a long life of 300 years, during which he remained unmarried and devoted himself to performing all the ordained Vedic rites and studying the Vedas. Finally, he lived for so many 100 years, 300 years. At the end, his body was crippled, and it was at this juncture that Indra appeared before Bharadwaja. Indra told Bharadwaja, if I extend your life by 100 years, what will you do with it? He just asked, another 100 years life I will give. What will you do with that? And Bharadwaja replied, I shall continue to do what I have been doing all these years so far. That means performing all the rites and rituals and the karmas, etc. Then Indra showed him 3 big, huge, large mountains before him, and the 3 mountains, they are Rig, Yaju and Sama Vedas, the principal Vedas. They are eternal and endless. And he picked up handful of soil from these 3 mountains and placed those 3 handful of soil there before Bharadwaja, and he told, what you have studied so far from your acharyas and you have been from your scripture studies, etc., it is equal only to the handful of sand that I have placed before you. But what is yet to be learned is like the great mountain. You have only learned a handful from the Rig, Yaju, Sama. This is what Indra told him. And it is unexplored. Now you must explore the remaining part of your life. Another 100 years if I extend your life, you must devote it to the thorough study of the Vedas. That is Mimamsa, analytical, critical study of the Vedas. That you have to perform. Come learn from the real import of the Vedas. Don't do just blind rites and rituals. So they are the source of all knowledge. That's what Indra told Bharadwaja. And Indra initiated the sage into the worship of that fire which is connected to the sun. We do the fire worship here in the rites and rituals, but the supreme fire, the Vedas, he is in the sun. Gayatri, the power. So, Indra initiated the sage into the worship of that fire which is connected with the sun, and Bharadwaja worshipped the sun as he had been instructed, and he obtained eternal life. This story comes in Taittiriya Brahmana. Gayatri, Gayandam Trayade iti Gayatri, that which saves, the mantra that saves one who chants it. There is potency in the Gayatri mantra. Perform that sadhana, not rite and rituals alone, but deep worship, understanding the import, the total import of the three Vedas. This is the message that Indra gave to Bharadwaja, and this is the path of Mimamsa. The performance of Dharma gives rise to a peculiar quality called Apurva, as I said, and it is by possessing that one is entitled to the bliss of heaven. So, perform actions, understanding the import, the meaning proper of the Vedas as prescribed in the Dharma Shastras. This Purva Mimamsa in later days was followed by Uttara Mimamsa of Vedavyasa himself, Badarayana. It is said that Vedavyasa himself appeared as Badarayana. Scholars do not accept that Purva Mimamsa is prior to Uttara Mimamsa or anything like that. This is a chronological order they do not accept. Most probably both of them arose at one and the same time. And the Uttara Mimamsa philosophy, which is based on the great sutras in the Upanishadic part of the Vedas, Vedanta Sutras, they were compiled by Badarayana and based on those Mahavakyas which are proclaimed in the Vedanta, in the Vedas, Upanishadic part of the Vedas, the Uttara Mimamsa has been evolved. And this Uttara Mimamsa inspired the later philosophers, Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva. These are the three principal acharyas who produced the Vedantic schools, Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja, Dvaita of Madhva. They are all products of the Uttara Mimamsa. In the next class, we will go into the details of Uttara Mimamsa and these schools of thought which arose out of Uttara Mimamsa. Jai Shri Ram.